I am Karima, 32 years old, and I grew up in a home where Islam was not just a religion but the measure of every choice, every thought, and every word I spoke. My father was strict, a man whose love was wrapped in discipline, his gaze heavy, his voice rarely soft, demanding obedience and respect above all else. My mother loved me, I know that, but her love was always shadowed by fear. Fear that one misstep, one stray thought could ruin everything for me, for the family. And I remember the excitement of Ramadan as a child, the anticipation of fasting, the rhythm of prayer and Quran recitation echoing in our home, the words familiar yet distant, memorized but never fully understood, comforting yet confining. I remember kneeling on the prayer mat, my forehead pressed to the ground, repeating the words I had been taught, feeling a strange mix of reverence, fear, and a subtle doubt I dared not speak aloud. Questions crept in quietly, like shadows. Why does God allow suffering? Why do prayers go unanswered? Why do the people I trust hurt others while claiming piety? I swallowed these questions, learned to hide them, to pray harder, to memorize faster, to obey without hesitation. My childhood was a delicate balance of devotion and silence, of learning rules without understanding the heart of faith. As I grew older, those shadows of doubt did not fade. They grew, quiet yet insistent, a whisper that perhaps there was more. And something I had not been taught, something no one wanted me to see. I wanted truth, real truth, not the filtered versions presented in lessons or sermons, not the convenient morality that demanded fear but offered little love. I craved honesty, but was trapped by fear. Fear of my father's anger, fear of my community's judgment, fear of eternal punishment. Every day, I watched hypocrisy around me, men preaching morality while hiding their faults, women fearing shame while bearing the weight of rigid tradition, children like me learning obedience without understanding. Inside, my soul ached for something I could not name, a longing that rituals could not satisfy. At night, lying in bed, I replayed conversations, scrutinized lessons, remembered moments when my heart whispered what my mind refused to acknowledge. Who am I if not what I have been taught to be? What if obedience is not enough? What if the fear I live under is not God's but man's? These questions became companions, haunting me silently, shaping every decision, every word, every step. Even as a young woman, I felt isolated, a lone traveler navigating a world of ritual and expectation, searching for a God who might not demand only obedience, but offer love, grace, and presence. The tension of my life was a tightrope stretched between inherited faith and personal longing. I had the fear of punishment on one side and the pull of truth on the other. I learned to mask my hunger, to smile when required, to perform my prayers with mechanical precision, while my heart cried out for meaning. I remember a night, sitting alone in my room, Quran open before me, feeling nothing but emptiness. I had recited those verses thousands of times, yet their meaning eluded me. I wanted God to speak, to reassure, to show a life beyond obligation, and to lift the weight of ritual from my shoulders. I wanted to believe, truly believe, but a shadow inside whispered relentlessly, "There is more, something you have not been shown." In that silence, in that tension between fear and yearning, a spark of courage took root. It was fragile, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. It told me that truth could be found, that freedom might exist beyond blind obedience, that my soul could breathe if I dared listen. Even as the world demanded silence, even as tradition's walls pressed in, the spark persisted, and in that fragile, trembling light, I made a choice, though I did not yet know the cost, though I could not imagine the trials ahead. I chose to listen. I chose to seek. I chose, quietly, secretly, to follow the whisper of my heart. And now, as I speak these words, I ask you to listen too, to not turn away from the questions that linger in your soul. If my story touches you, if it sparks a thought or a hope, please subscribe, like, comment, and share it. Let it reach others who sit silently at night, wrestling with doubt, with fear, with longing, yearning for freedom and truth? Let testimonies like mine ignite courage in hearts trapped in shadows, whispering that life, love, and God's mercy are real. I cannot promise comfort, I cannot promise ease. I can only share that truth, when sought with all your heart, changes everything. It frees the soul, it awakens life, and it will guide those who listen to the light beyond fear, beyond expectation, and beyond the world that tells you to remain silent. That is why I am here. That is why I share my story. That is why I hope it reaches someone who needs it most. The first seeds of doubt were planted quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the corners of my mind. But once they took root, they grew fast and wild, entwining themselves around everything I had been taught to believe. I remember the day I first noticed contradictions in the Quran, small things I had overlooked as a child, verses that seemed at odds with each other, promises that went unfulfilled, lessons that felt incomplete. I had always been diligent, memorizing prayers, observing fasts, reciting verses flawlessly, yet life around me did not match the perfection I had been taught would result from devotion. I noticed hypocrisy too, the sharp contrast between sermons and reality. There's the silent cruelty behind polite smiles, the fear and judgment that permeated every interaction in my community. Each observation was a whisper, each question a spark, and I was terrified of what might happen if I dared to explore them. At first, I tried to bury these thoughts, pretending they were nothing, focusing on prayer, on memorization, on obedience. But curiosity is persistent, and the more I hid it, the louder it became. I began researching secretly online and asking questions in the quiet hours of the night when the house was asleep. I typed cautiously, my fingers trembling over the keyboard, searching for answers that might confirm my fears or reassure me. Instead, I found a maze of contradictions, histories hidden, explanations that did not satisfy my heart. Each discovery brought both relief and fear. Relief that I was not imagining my doubts, fear of what it might cost me if anyone knew. I remembered childhood lessons, the stories of hell, and the warnings of disobedience, the fear instilled in me to prevent questioning. And yet, something inside rebelled, refused to be silenced. I began noticing patterns in the people around me, the pressure to conform, the quiet punishment for curiosity, the shame used to control, the secrecy demanded for even minor deviations. I realized that fear had become a tool of obedience more than faith ever had. Nights became restless. My thoughts raced while my body lay still. I imagined consequences, say family disappointment, communal rejection, whispers behind my back, and the possibility of eternal punishment. My heart ached with moral conflict: obey man or obey God, remain silent or pursue truth. I could feel the walls of my upbringing closing in, yet the pull of truth was stronger than any fear. My inner dialogue was relentless, a storm of questions and reflection. Was my faith real, if it was only based on fear and obedience? Was God present if the rituals were hollow? And I could not reconcile the teachings with my experience of life. I began keeping a secret journal, writing in whispers to myself what I dared not speak aloud, the questions, the doubts, the longings. Writing brought relief, but also risk, for discovery would bring wrath and shame. The act of documenting my inner world made it feel more real, more urgent. I began to feel a strange mix of guilt and liberation. I had been taught that questioning was dangerous, perhaps sinful, and yet ignoring these thoughts felt like denying myself, like suffocating my soul. The tension grew unbearable. I knew that at some point I would have to choose: to continue hiding, living in fear and ritual, or to pursue the truth regardless of cost. The idea of choice terrified me, yet it awakened a strange thrill, a sense that my life could be more than obedience and shadow. I could feel my heart beginning to align with something beyond ritual, something beyond fear, something real. Nights were now filled with both dread and wonder. I would imagine conversations with God, asking questions I had never dared, seeking signs, hoping for a voice, a vision, anything to guide me. I felt as though I was standing on the edge of a precipice, the ground of certainty crumbling beneath me, the wind of revelation blowing, and I had to decide whether to step into the unknown. The seeds of doubt had grown into a forest in my mind, tangled and overwhelming, yet strangely beautiful, is alive with possibility. I was afraid, yes, of punishment, of shame, of loss, but I was more afraid of living my life in silence, of dying without ever knowing the truth. And so I made a quiet vow to myself, a whispered promise in the dark. I would seek, I would ask, I would explore, even if it cost me everything I had ever known. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but for the first time, I felt the stirrings of courage, the first taste of freedom, as the thrill of a mind and heart beginning to awaken. And I knew, even then, that there was no turning back. The crisis came suddenly, a storm that tore through everything I thought I knew, leaving me disoriented, shaken, and terrified. It wasn't just a doubt anymore. It was an event that shattered the foundation of my faith and forced me to confront a reality I had never imagined. I had trusted an imam in our community, a man who had guided me in prayers, counseled me on right living, uttered and praised my devotion. I believed in his words, relied on his guidance, and held his approval as a measure of my own righteousness. One day, I discovered his betrayal, something I cannot fully describe, a violation of trust so deep it left me numb. The knowledge struck me like a physical blow, twisting my stomach into knots and leaving my chest heavy with grief and anger. How could someone I revered, someone who spoke of God and morality, commit such a wrong? The hypocrisy I had once seen in fragments around me now stared me in the face, and I realized that the world I had been taught to trust, the community, the authority, the structure, was fragile, flawed, and sometimes corrupt. My heart raced with fear and disbelief. I could not understand how God could allow this to happen, how prayers and devotion could not prevent betrayal from those I depended on. I felt an emptiness opening inside me, a void that ritual and recitation could not fill. I stared at my prayer mat, at the Quran lying open before me, and felt nothing but silence. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake the heavens and make sense of this pain, but my voice caught in my throat. I felt abandoned, angry, and ashamed, not only for the betrayal itself, but for the blind faith I had placed in man. Memories of my childhood prayers, of long nights in Ramadan, of recitations I had once felt pride in, now seemed hollow, mechanical, meaningless. I questioned everything. As if devotion and obedience could not protect me from this, what meaning did they hold? My father's words echoed in my mind, the discipline, the warnings, the fear that had always kept me in line. I felt torn between the fear of God, the fear of man, and the desire to find truth beyond them both. Tears streamed down my face as I sat alone, the weight of realization pressing me into the floor. I felt like I was falling into a pit, no bottom in sight, my soul dangling between fear and despair. I wanted to believe, but belief felt impossible, a lie I could no longer maintain. I wanted to obey, but obedience now felt meaningless, an act of submission to a system that had failed me. The betrayal left me paralyzed, uncertain if I could trust anyone, including myself. Nights were sleepless, filled with questions, memories, and the silent echo of what had been broken. I found myself staring at the Quran for hours, trying to summon the faith I had lost. But the words seemed distant, foreign, disconnected from my heart. I felt abandoned by God, by family, by community, even by the versions of myself I had relied upon for certainty. Fear gripped me like ice, and shame weighed heavy on my chest. I realized that nothing would ever be the same. The life I had known, the faith I had been trained to follow, the structures I had depended on, all of it had collapsed. I could not pretend anymore. I could not return to mechanical prayer or blind obedience. Something inside me demanded truth, and even if the cost was everything. The thought of leaving the life I had known, the rituals, the safety, terrified me. Yet the thought of staying in lies and fear terrified me more. I was caught in a storm of grief, anger, and longing, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to confront faith as a living, breathing challenge, not a set of rules or expectations. I sat alone, shaking, staring at the Quran, and realized that I was at a crossroads. I did not know where to turn. I did not know who to trust. I did not know if God would answer me, or if I would find the courage to seek beyond the shadows of my upbringing. And yet, despite the terror, despite the despair, a tiny spark remained, a whisper inside me. Do not turn away. There is more. There is truth. Seek it, even if the cost is everything. That spark trembled, fragile and faint, but it would not die. And in that moment, I realized that I could no longer remain silent, could no longer pretend, and could no longer live in fear alone. The path forward was terrifying, unknown, and dangerous, but it was the only path that could lead me to life, to freedom, to truth. And so I sat trembling, heart pounding, staring at the Quran in silence, unsure what I believed, unsure what awaited me, but knowing with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. After the betrayal, I could no longer silence the questions that had always whispered in the corners of my mind. I began asking them in secret, cautiously, fearful of what might happen if anyone discovered the unrest in my heart. Each question felt like a spark against dry tinder, threatening to ignite a fire I could not control. I remembered the lessons of my childhood, the stories of hell, the warnings of punishment for curiosity, yet the hunger for truth would not be quelled. I started reading quietly. At first, just small passages from the Quran, but then I searched online for interpretations, meant for answers, for the voices that might speak honestly where my community would not. Every discovery was exhilarating and terrifying. Some verses that I had memorized all my life suddenly took on new, confusing meanings. Historical contexts I had never been taught exposed contradictions I could not ignore. I realized that so much of what I had believed was filtered through fear and tradition, not understanding. Anxiety gnawed at me as I delved deeper. What if my curiosity were discovered? What would my father say? What would my mother do? What would happen if the neighbors, the imam, the women at the mosque found out? I pictured their disapproval, their judgment, the shame that could fall upon me, and yet I could not stop. The forbidden knowledge called to me like a voice in the night. I remembered moments as a child when I had asked small questions, only to be told to obey, to accept, to remain silent, and I realized that silence had always been the easy choice, but it had never satisfied me. The tension inside me grew unbearable. I felt as though I was living two lives, the obedient daughter by day, the seeker of truth by night. My heart beat faster whenever I typed a new query, whenever I clicked a link, whenever I read someone's testimony online about doubt, faith, or freedom. I was discovering that I was not alone, that women like me were questioning, exploring, and sometimes leaving everything behind to follow their conscience. Each revelation filled me with hope and fear in equal measure. I began recording my thoughts secretly, writing long journals in code, in hidden apps, in places no one could find. I questioned everything, the teachings of men, the interpretations of scholars, the rituals I had performed for years. I felt a moral conflict so deep it shook me. The voice of obedience, drilled into me for decades, clashing with the stirrings of my soul that demanded truth. And I realized that seeking truth could cost me everything. My family, my home, my community, even my safety. But the alternative? Living a life of hollow obedience, denying the stirrings of my heart, was unbearable. I felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage, the walls ornate but confining, the windows barred, the freedom I craved just out of reach. And so I asked the forbidden questions. Why does God allow suffering? Why do prayers go unanswered? Why is the world full of injustice if the Creator is just? Why must fear govern faith? Why do ritual and law replace love and mercy? Each question felt dangerous, yet necessary. Each question brought me closer to truth and farther from the safety of my old life. I imagined the consequences if my family discovered my thoughts, my father's anger, my mother's worry, the community's whispers, the imam's judgment. They all loomed over me, a dark cloud of fear. And yet, the more I feared, the more I needed to ask. I began having late-night conversations with God in my mind, silent prayers that were equal parts fear and hope, asking for guidance, for answers, for courage. The whispers of my soul grew louder than the shadows of tradition. I knew that this path was dangerous, perhaps even life-threatening. But the alternative was death of the spirit, a life spent in quiet submission while my heart withered. And so I continued, secretly, furtively, reading, questioning, writing. I'm praying. I felt alive in a way I never had, my mind opening, my heart stretching, even as fear pressed down on me. Every night became a test of courage, every secret search a risk, every answer a spark of hope. I was stepping into a world of uncertainty, but for the first time, I felt like I was walking toward life, not just survival. And even though I did not yet know where this path would lead, I felt a small, fierce certainty deep inside. The truth was out there, and I would find it, and no matter what it cost. That night, sleep came reluctantly, as it often did now, because my mind would not rest. Questions and doubts swirled endlessly, and yet my body craved the escape that only dreams could provide. But the dream that found me that night was not escape. It was confrontation, revelation, and terror, all at once. I found myself standing in darkness, a void so vast that it swallowed every sense, every memory, every familiar comfort. The air felt thick, heavy, almost suffocating, and the only light came from somewhere deep within me, small and fragile, flickering like a candle in a storm. And then I heard it, a whisper, gentle but commanding, speaking words I could not fully understand yet resonated with the deepest corners of my soul. It called me forward, and I felt compelled to obey, though fear gripped every fiber of my being. As I walked, shapes began to form in the darkness. Shadows at first, then figures, then places that felt real, yet unreal, places that seemed to exist outside of time, outside of logic. I saw glimpses of lives I had lived, moments I had hidden even from myself, faces of family and friends, flashes of joy and pain, each one tinged with a strange, haunting light. And then, the fear intensified. A wave of darkness, cold and suffocating, pressed in on me, threatening to consume the fragile spark of light I carried. I felt my heart race, my lungs tighten, my mind screaming to wake up, to flee, and to reject what I was seeing. But something deeper inside, something I could not name, urged me to stay, to witness, to endure. And in that terror, I saw visions of truth I could not ignore. Images of lives bound by fear, hearts chained to obligation, souls longing for freedom they did not yet know existed. I felt a deep empathy for these lives, as if the suffering of generations was pressing against me, demanding acknowledgement. Then a presence appeared, not menacing, not commanding, but gentle and luminous and undeniable. It spoke not with words, but with understanding, with love, with authority that transcended fear. I felt seen in a way I had never been seen before. My doubts, my questions, my longing laid bare and embraced. And yet, the dream did not comfort me entirely. It challenged me. It demanded that I look beyond the familiar, that I confront the lies I had been taught, the fears that had controlled me, the obedience that had silenced my heart. I was trembling, some tears streaming down my face, heart racing, soul quaking. The presence seemed to beckon me forward, to step beyond the darkness into a light I could not yet name but somehow recognized as home. And then, without warning, I felt a shadow, a presence of judgment and weight, a force that seemed intent on crushing my courage, filling me with guilt, fear, and shame. I realized I was standing on the edge of two worlds, one of darkness, fear, and obedience, and one of light, freedom, and truth. My body wanted to flee, my mind wanted to resist, yet my spirit cried out, longing to step into the light. The dream shifted suddenly, as if the darkness itself was alive, twisting, writhing, trying to pull me back, whispering lies and threats, reminding me of punishment, rejection, isolation, death. And still, I felt the presence of love, a force stronger than any fear, pulling me forward, whispering that courage, truth, and faith were worth the risk. I woke with a start. My body drenched in sweat, heart pounding, breath ragged. The room was dark, silent and safe, yet the echoes of the dream lingered, imprinted on my soul. I felt fear, yes, but also wonder. I knew that I had glimpsed something beyond what I had ever imagined, a reality that defied the structures and expectations I had lived under. I sensed that this dream was not just a figment of sleep, but a calling, a preparation for the path I would soon have to walk, a warning and an invitation at once. The memory of the light and the shadows stayed with me, a haunting and beautiful presence, reminding me that fear could be confronted, that truth could be sought, and that God, in a way I had never known, was near. I could not shake the feeling that I was on the verge of a revelation, that the whispers, the visions, the doubts, and the fears were all leading me somewhere, toward something, someone I had yet to meet fully. And as I lay there in the dark, heart racing, I whispered a prayer, fragile and uncertain, yet full of longing. Show me. Lead me. Do not let me turn away. I cannot live in silence any longer. I need the truth. I knew that my life would never be the same again, that the dream had opened a door I could not close, and that the journey I had been secretly walking was about to become terrifyingly, beautifully real. The dream returned again that night, more vivid, more terrifying, more real than anything I had ever experienced. I felt myself falling, not through space, but through layers of reality until I landed in a place that seemed to exist beyond time or comprehension. The air was thick with heat and smoke, the ground beneath me cracked and glowing, and a stench so foul it clawed at my senses filled every corner. I could hear the moans of anguish echoing endlessly, a sound so raw and primal that it shook me to my core. I wanted to look away, to cover my eyes, but something inside me demanded that I see, that I witness. Then I saw him, Muhammad, walking in this fiery place, not as the revered figure I had learned about all my life, but as a soul bound in torment, his expression one of confusion and sorrow, his form writhing in a heat that seemed eternal. I froze, my chest tightening, tears burning my eyes, a mix of horror, disbelief, and sorrow flooding me. How could this be? Everything I had been taught screamed that he was a guide, a prophet, a beacon of truth. And yet here he was, suffering in a way I had never imagined, in a realm of fire and despair that defied my understanding. My mind screamed at me to wake, to deny it, to convince myself that it was just a dream, but my heart could not escape the weight of the vision. The air shimmered with the heat of judgment, and I felt guilt pressing down on me, as if the sins of generations were being poured over me like molten metal. I had always feared hell, had learned the verses of warning by heart, and yet nothing could have prepared me for this. My soul trembled, shaking with questions I could barely form. What does this mean for me? For my faith? For the prayers I had poured out in obedience? And then, amidst the flames, I heard a voice. Not mocking, not commanding, but sorrowful, pleading, almost maternal in its despair. The words were not fully clear, but the message penetrated every fiber of my being. Truth cannot be hidden, righteousness cannot be fabricated, and the cost of blind obedience may be greater than we realize. I felt my knees weaken, my hands trembling. I wanted to turn away, but the vision held me, compelling me to confront the reality I had been taught to fear without question. I saw faces of others, souls bound in fire, some crying, some screaming, some silent but racked with anguish. The scene was both horrifying and mesmerizing, a brutal reflection of a world beyond understanding, yet one that demanded acknowledgement. And then the figure of Muhammad approached me, his eyes meeting mine, filled with a sorrow and recognition that cut deeper than the flames around him. I felt an unbearable weight of responsibility, of realization, that truth matters, that obedience without discernment can lead to ruin, that the spiritual path is not safe simply because it is taught, but only because it aligns with the will of the Creator. The vision expanded, revealing layers of reality I could not comprehend, and showing me consequences, choices, and the fragility of human understanding. I was weeping, my body shaking, yet I could not look away. Every instinct screamed to wake, to flee, to return to the familiar lies that had protected me, yet my spirit could not deny the truth pressing in, the heat, the sound, the weight of anguish all combined to etch the vision into my soul permanently. And then, amidst the flames, Muhammad spoke again, words more clear now, though still soft and penetrating. The path you follow must be chosen with discernment, for fear and tradition alone cannot save the heart. Seek the truth beyond obedience, beyond ritual, or your soul too may suffer. Do not turn from what is real. I could feel my heart split open, sorrow for what I had believed colliding with a newfound awareness that my choices mattered more than I had ever imagined. I wanted to cry, to scream, to run, yet I stayed, absorbing every painful lesson, every burning truth, every revelation pressed into my spirit. And then, as suddenly as it began, the vision lifted. I woke drenched in sweat, chest heaving, heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. The room was dark, my body shaking, yet the imprint of the dream remained on my soul, undeniable and vivid. I felt fear, yes, an all-consuming terror of what lay ahead, yet beneath it, a spark of clarity emerged. The dream was not punishment, it was revelation, warning, guidance. It showed me the cost of blind faith, and the danger of obedience without understanding, the necessity of seeking truth with courage. And even though the vision was horrifying, even though my mind recoiled at the images, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could not ignore this. I could not continue in silence. The path I had been walking secretly, tentatively, cautiously now demanded action, demanded courage, demanded a confrontation with everything I had been taught. I did not yet know where it would lead, or what it would cost, but I knew that from this moment forward, my life could never be the same. Something within me had awakened, a spark that could no longer be extinguished by fear, by tradition, or by expectation. And though I shivered with dread and wonder, I felt the first true stirrings of hope. After that dream, the world seemed different, as if the veil had been lifted just enough for me to see what had always been hidden in plain sight. The fear lingered, thick and oppressive, but now it was accompanied by something else, a whisper faint at first, but growing clearer with each passing day. It came in quiet moments, while I sat alone in my room, when I walked through the streets unnoticed, when the world slept and I felt its stillness pressing around me. At first I thought it was my imagination, a trick of my mind desperate for comfort, yet the whisper carried a gentleness I could not ignore, a love I had never experienced in the rigid teachings of my upbringing. No poksik, Karima. Do not turn away. There is more. The words were not loud, not commanding, but intimate, penetrating my thoughts, soothing and unsettling all at once. I began noticing moments in my life that I had overlooked, small indications that God had been present even when I had believed myself abandoned. I remembered times when I had been in danger, when a small hand guided me, when circumstances shifted subtly to protect me, when my heart longed for truth and someone unseen had quietly met that longing. And now, the whisper seemed to guide me more clearly, urging me to look beyond the teachings I had inherited, beyond the fear and rules that had governed my life. I felt a stirring in my heart, a pull towards something I could not yet name, but sensed deeply was real. Yet fear pressed heavily against the edges of that stirring. What if I was wrong? What if listening to this voice was dangerous, even sinful? What if following it meant losing everything, my family, my home, my place in the world I had known? The conflict inside me was brutal, tearing my heart between desire and terror. Every instinct told me to remain silent, to hide, to return to obedience and routine, but the whisper refused to be ignored. Do not fear. I am with you. The intimacy of it struck me to my core, and for the first time I felt that perhaps faith was not simply ritual and memorization, but relationship and trust. And I began looking for signs, for confirmation, for any proof that this whisper was not just my imagination. I noticed small coincidences, moments of inexplicable peace, times when my heart ached for clarity, and an answer arrived in subtle, undeniable ways. I felt drawn to the stories of Jesus I had heard in passing, glimpses from distant encounters, faint memories of a Savior I did not yet understand. The whisper seemed to point me toward Him, toward love, toward life beyond fear. But every step toward that realization came with dread. I feared what my family would say, what my friends would think, what the community would do if they knew I was no longer fully obedient, if they sensed my heart had shifted. I questioned whether I had the courage to follow the whisper, to trust what it was leading me to, even if it promised freedom and truth. And yet, the whisper grew more insistent, more tender, more loving. It did not condemn, it did not threaten, it did not demand blind obedience. It simply called me to step forward, to listen, to trust. Each night I lay awake, heart pounding, listening for its voice, replaying the dream of fire, the vision of Muhammad, the warning and the mercy entwined within it. I began praying, not the prayers I had memorized, but raw, vulnerable pleas from the depths of my soul, asking for guidance, for courage, for clarity, for truth. And slowly, the whisper became a companion, a guide, a source of hope amid the terror and confusion. I could feel my heart opening, stretching beyond fear, reaching for something real, something eternal, something loving. And though doubt still clung to me, shadowing my every step, I began to understand that the path I had feared was also the path of life, that courage was necessary for truth, and that the whisper I heard was leading me to salvation I had never imagined. I realized that I could not ignore it. I could not turn back to the comfortable lies, could not continue in silence. Something inside me demanded action, demanded trust, demanded faith. I began to imagine a life guided not by fear but by love, a life where obedience was a response to truth, not terror. And in that imagination, I found a glimmer of peace, a spark of hope, a taste of the freedom I had been longing for all my life. The whisper promised more than answers. It promised presence, intimacy, protection, and guidance. And though I did not yet know where it would lead, I felt the first stirrings of courage strong enough to defy fear. I knew that every step forward would be dangerous, that the world might punish me, that I might face isolation and rejection. But the whisper reminded me that truth was worth the cost, that faith demanded bravery, and that love, real and unshakable, awaited those who dared to seek it. And so, I made a quiet vow in the silence of my room, listening to the gentle voice that had begun to shape my heart. I would follow it no matter what. I would seek the truth, no matter the cost. I would step toward the light, even if it meant walking through fire, even if it meant leaving everything I knew behind. And in that vow, trembling and raw, I felt a small, undeniable surge of hope, a flicker of life I had never known, and a certainty that the journey I had begun in shadows was leading me toward something beautiful, terrifying, and real. One evening, trembling in the quiet of my room, I made a decision that I had feared for months. My fingers hovered over the phone screen, hesitant, knowing that this act alone could change everything. I downloaded a Bible app. Just that small click carried a weight I had never imagined. The possibility of discovery, the threat of punishment, the enormity of stepping beyond the faith I had always been taught to obey. My heart raced, palms sweating, and I felt a mixture of fear, excitement, and anticipation so sharp it took my breath away. I opened the app for the first time, unsure where to begin, my mind flooded with questions. Was this right? Was it dangerous? Could I trust what I would find? I started with Psalms, drawn to the words that spoke of longing, comfort, and God's presence. As I read, I felt something shift inside me. The words were like water on a parched soul, gentle, nourishing, full of love and hope I had never encountered in memorized prayers or ritual obedience. I could feel the tension inside me easing, as if the heavy chains of fear and guilt were loosening, and a small flicker of peace began to glow in my heart. I moved next to John, hesitant at first, my mind struggling to grasp the foreign stories, the radical message of love and grace, the life of a man who spoke of God in ways I had never imagined. And yet, each verse resonated deeply, striking chords in my soul I had not known existed. I read of forgiveness, of mercy, out of the light that overcomes darkness, of love that redeems and restores. Tears streamed down my face as I realized that for the first time, I understood what it meant to be seen, to be loved, to be offered freedom unconditionally. I felt a stirring in my spirit, a whisper of recognition that this was what I had been seeking all along. The truth that my heart longed for, the presence I had silently cried out to, the guidance that had been murmuring in dreams and whispers. But fear remained, an ever-present, shadowing my joy. What if my father found out? What if my mother sensed the change in me? What if the community discovered the secret I was holding, the forbidden act of seeking truth? Each word I read was a risk, each verse a step into the unknown, yet the pull of what I was discovering was stronger than my fear. I began reading daily, hiding my phone beneath pillows, under blankets, in drawers, anywhere I could ensure no one would see. The words became a lifeline, and a secret source of courage and clarity. I felt the gentle guidance of God in ways I had never experienced, small nudges, moments of understanding, sudden insight, and inexplicable peace. My soul, long burdened by fear and doubt, began to breathe. I realized that I had been starving for this: truth, intimacy, love, and freedom, without even knowing it. I began to internalize the stories, the parables, the promises, letting them reshape my understanding of God, of life, of myself. In every verse I read cut through the fog of fear and tradition, revealing a path I had never dared imagine, a path toward life, light, and truth. And yet, danger lurked in the shadows. Every day, the thought of discovery haunted me, the potential wrath, the shame, the judgment from those I loved and those I feared. The tension was unbearable, yet the light within me grew stronger, fed by every secret verse, every quiet prayer, every moment of reflection. I began speaking to Jesus silently, not awkwardly at first, in whispered conversations that only I could hear. I poured out my fear, my longing, my questions, my grief, my hope. And I felt answered, not always in words, but in peace, in guidance, in the subtle assurance that I was not alone. The Bible became my secret sanctuary, a place where I could wrestle with doubt, cry with despair, and celebrate hope. I memorized passages, repeated prayers in my mind, and began imagining what it would mean to truly live in the freedom and love that these words promised. I felt the first stirrings of courage to act, to step beyond secrecy, to consider that faith could be lived openly, even if it meant loss, rejection, or danger. And though fear never fully left me, it was no longer paralyzing. It became the shadow behind the light I was discovering, a reminder of the cost of truth, the stakes of love, and the courage required to follow a path that was mine and not imposed, not dictated, but freely chosen. Every day, I felt the whispers of truth guiding me deeper, affirming that I was not alone, that God was with me, that Christ was real, and that even amidst the fear, I could find freedom, peace, and life beyond what I had ever imagined. And in those secret moments, reading, praying, listening, I realized that the journey I had begun in shadows was taking shape, illuminated by love, light, then and the promise that my soul had been longing for all its life. It didn't take long for my absence to be noticed. Ramadan was in full swing, and my family expected me to attend every prayer, every gathering, every ritual, without fail. But I couldn't. My heart no longer resonated with the motions I had performed for so long. I could not raise my hands and recite words that now felt hollow. I tried to explain to myself that staying away was for reflection, for seeking understanding, but for answering the questions that had consumed my nights. But when my father noticed my absence from the mosque and my mother's anxious glances followed me wherever I went, I knew the storm was coming. That evening, as I entered our home, I was met with a tension so thick it seemed to press against my chest. My father's eyes were sharp, scrutinizing, a storm contained behind the calm of tradition. "Karima," he said, his voice steady but edged with ice, "why have you not been at prayers? Like, why have you missed the mosque this week? Do you not respect the month of Ramadan?" I tried to respond carefully, choosing words that would not betray my inner turmoil. I've been unwell, Baba. My head and stomach..." My voice faltered under his gaze. He did not soften. My mother's face was pale, fear etched in every line, but her eyes carried worry, not anger. She whispered, "My daughter, what is happening? Why are you avoiding prayers?" The room felt smaller, the air heavier, and I realized that this confrontation was inevitable. I could feel the walls of my life closing in, the consequences of my hidden journey pressing against me. My siblings, too, had begun to notice, their curious glances and hushed questions adding to my anxiety. My heart pounded as I tried to respond without revealing the truth. Every instinct screamed to hide, to retreat, to pretend I was still the obedient daughter, the devout girl they had always known. But the whisper that had guided me, the light I had found in secret, refused to be silenced. My pulse raced, a mixture of fear and determination coursing through me. "I am thinking, Baba," I said finally, voice trembling but firm. "I need time. I need to understand myself, my faith, my heart." My father's eyes narrowed and the room seemed to vibrate with unspoken judgment. "Time?" he snapped. "Do you think you are allowed to take time from God? Do you think you can question what He has commanded?" My mother's hands trembled as she clasped them together, murmuring prayers under her breath. I felt their disappointment and fear weighing on me like a physical force, but something inside me refused to break. The tension stretched, unrelenting, until I could hear only the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I thought of the dreams, the whispers, the light I had glimpsed, and I drew courage from that small flickering flame. I cannot pretend anymore," I whispered almost to myself. "I cannot continue without understanding." My father's anger surged, his voice rising as accusations and warnings tumbled from his lips. The words stung, slicing through the fragile calm I had held. My mother wept quietly, torn between loyalty to her husband and love for her daughter. My siblings stared, uncertain, caught between curiosity and fear. I felt isolated, the weight of their expectations pressing down like a storm. And every principle I had learned since childhood, the obedience, the discipline, the fear of shame, clashed violently with the stirrings of my soul. I was trembling, yet I stood, heart pounding, unwilling to bow entirely to fear. And then, just when the confrontation seemed unbearable, a small, quiet voice within me, the whisper I had come to trust, rose above the chaos. Do not be afraid. You are not alone. Truth and love will guide you. I drew a deep, shuddering breath, letting it steady me, and I realized in that moment that the storm of my family's anger and disappointment, though terrifying, could not compare to the storm I had weathered within myself. The cost of silence, of pretending, of living in fear, had become unbearable. The consequences of truth might be harsh, but the alternative, living a lie, abandoning my soul, was far worse. I saw my reflection in my mother's tear-streaked eyes and knew she feared for me, but also that she might one day understand. And I glimpsed my father's rigid posture and recognized that he acted from fear and tradition, not malice, though his anger still cut like a knife. And in that room, filled with tension, fear, and love twisted together, I understood something fundamental. I had taken the first step toward freedom, and though it would bring storms, the path could not be denied. Alone in my heart, I made a silent vow. I would endure the anger, the fear, the judgment for the sake of truth, for the sake of my soul, for the promise I had glimpsed in whispers, in dreams, in the secret words that had begun to transform me. The storm raged, but beneath it, a new clarity began to grow, fragile but unyielding. I knew that the journey I had begun in secrecy was no longer hidden. It had begun to collide with the world around me. And though fear still pressed down like a weight, I also felt the first glimmers of courage, the first stirrings of freedom, and a quiet, unshakable hope that I would not face this storm alone, that something greater than fear, something eternal, was walking with me even now. Even as the family storm raged around me, another hunger grew inside, a hunger that was quieter, deeper, more insistent than any physical need. It was the ache of my soul, the longing I had carried for years without knowing its name. I had been taught obedience, ritual, and submission, yet none of that filled the emptiness I felt inside. I remembered my childhood, the endless lessons at the mosque, the Quranic recitations, the sermons about sin and punishment. I remembered the fear they instilled in me, the shame that accompanied every question I had dared to ask, the heavy weight of tradition pressing down on a young heart that longed for freedom. And yet, beneath all that, the spark had always been there, a whisper of curiosity, a flicker of longing, a sense that there must be more than rules and rituals. Now, that hunger had grown unbearable. I spent long nights in my room, the walls closing in as I wrestled with my thoughts. I prayed in secret, not the memorized words of my childhood, but raw, trembling cries from the depths of my heart. I asked for guidance, for truth, for freedom, for someone to meet me where I was, in fear and doubt and longing. I thought of the dreams I had had, the visions of light and fire, the whispers that spoke of love I had never known. I could feel them stirring something inside me, breaking through the fear and guilt that had governed my life. Each verse I read in the Bible app, each story of Jesus, each promise of love and mercy, fed that hunger, adding to the ache and the hope entwined in my heart. And yet, the hunger was painful. It tore at me, reminding me of all I had lost and all I had yet to gain. I mourned for the girl I had been, obedient and fearful, the daughter who had never questioned, who had never dared to step beyond the familiar. I grieved for the friendships I could no longer maintain, the expectations I could no longer fulfill, the rituals I could no longer perform with sincerity. Shame and guilt pressed down, whispering that I was wrong, that I was betraying everything I had been taught to hold sacred. But the whisper of truth, the pull of the unseen presence guiding me, would not be silenced. It reminded me that obedience without understanding, tradition without love, and fear without freedom. These were not what I was created for. My spirit craved life, light, and connection with the God I had not yet fully known. The hunger was accompanied by fear, fear of discovery, fear of loss, fear of rejection, But it was stronger than the fear, stronger than the shame, stronger than the weight of expectation. I realized that this hunger was a gift, a signal that my soul was alive, that God had placed within me a desire that could not be satisfied by ritual alone. And with that realization came courage, small at first, a tremor of bravery I had never known. I began imagining what it would be like to live fully, freely, in a relationship with the Creator who had been whispering to me all along. I imagined asking questions openly, seeking truth without fear, praying without the chains of obligation, loving without hesitation. The vision of that life was intoxicating and terrifying at once, yet I could not turn away. I remembered the warnings of my childhood, the fire, the judgment, the punishment. But the hunger in my soul demanded more. It demanded honesty, authenticity, and courage. I began to see that my spiritual hunger was not a curse but a compass, pointing me toward life, toward Christ, toward freedom. Each day, as I navigated the storm at home, the scrutiny of my family, and the pressure of tradition, I clung to that hunger, letting it guide my thoughts, shape my prayers, and strengthen my resolve. I began to understand that I could not suppress it without dying inside, that ignoring it would be a betrayal of my own soul. And so I fed it, cautiously, secretly, with scripture, prayer, reflection, and the whispers that had grown so clear over time. I allowed myself to feel the ache fully, to acknowledge the longing, to trust that it was leading me somewhere real. With every tear, every sleepless night, every fearful prayer, the hunger deepened but also clarified. Then I began to see that fear was a natural part of transformation, that the path to truth would never be easy, and that courage was born in the tension between fear and desire. I felt my heart opening, my mind awakening, my soul stretching toward a reality I had longed for without knowing it. And in the midst of fear, confusion, and grief, I tasted the first glimmer of peace, the realization that the hunger itself was evidence of God's presence, proof that I was not abandoned. Say proof that life beyond fear, beyond tradition, beyond judgment was possible. I resolved in that moment that I would follow the hunger wherever it led, that I would seek the truth even if it meant facing storms I could not yet imagine, and that I would allow God to guide me even when the path was uncertain, even when the cost was high. My soul had spoken and I had heard. The loneliness of my journey pressed in like a weight I could barely bear. I had hidden my doubts, my prayers, my Bible app, my dreams from everyone, even from those I loved most. The fear of discovery was constant, gnawing at my courage, leaving me isolated, trembling, and desperate for connection. And then, quietly, almost miraculously, I discovered them. Other voices, other hearts, other souls walking similar paths. It began with a hesitant search online, fingers trembling over the keyboard, my typing phrases I had never dared speak aloud. I am questioning Islam, secret faith, Christ, salvation, truth. The results were like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Online Christian communities, virtual churches, private prayer groups, they existed and they were real. At first I hesitated. Could I trust them? Were these safe spaces or traps for the curious, the naive, the vulnerable? But the whispers of truth, the lingering echoes of dreams and visions, nudged me forward. One night, then I joined a private chat group. My heart raced as I typed my first message, anonymous, cautious. I am searching, I am afraid, I need guidance. The response came quickly, warm and tender, filled with encouragement and understanding. Welcome, sister. You are not alone. God sees you. He has been with you all along. You are safe here. Something inside me cracked open. Tears fell freely as I realized that I was no longer alone, that others understood, that my fear could meet love without judgment. In the weeks that followed, I began attending virtual Bible studies, listening to sermons, participating in prayers, and sharing my heart cautiously. Each encounter strengthened me, nurtured the flicker of courage, and allowed the whispers I had followed in solitude to gain voice. I learned the power of shared faith, of communal encouragement, of standing together even when the world outside the screen was hostile and unforgiving. I felt the first stirrings of real courage, not the timid bravery of hiding in shadows, but the kind that grows from truth, love, and shared understanding. Yet the fear of exposure never left. I would hide my laptop, log off quickly when my family approached, and pray silently for protection. The risk was ever present, but the reward, the quiet peace, the guidance, the presence of God in a community that accepted me, was worth it. I discovered mentorship through online connections, women and men who had walked paths like mine, Ami who had endured fear, isolation, and rejection, and who now offered wisdom, prayers, and encouragement. They celebrated small victories with me, prayed for courage in moments of doubt, and reminded me that my journey was holy, that my questions were sacred, and that my faith could grow without fear of condemnation. Each interaction, each prayer, each shared testimony bolstered my resolve, teaching me that faith was not solitary obedience, but a relationship, and nurtured by God's love and the fellowship of believers. I began to imagine a life beyond secrecy, beyond fear, where I could worship openly, serve with purpose, and speak truth without trembling. The whispers of my dreams and visions aligned with the voices I encountered online, confirming that I was on a path guided by God, not by human expectation, not by fear, not by obligation. And yet, the decision to step beyond anonymity and secrecy loomed ahead. Could I ever truly confess my faith? And could I face my family, my community, my world with the truth in my heart? The answer remained uncertain, but the fellowship I had found gave me strength, reminding me that courage grows when it is nurtured, and that fear is a natural companion to transformation. I prayed silently in those nights of online fellowship, thanking God for this hidden sanctuary, for these hidden voices, for the gentle courage they instilled. I felt a peace beginning to replace the isolation, a quiet reassurance that I could not yet fully see the path, but that each step I took in truth, no matter how small, was guided by Him. And in that delicate, trembling balance between fear and faith, I understood something vital. The journey could not be walked alone, but it could be walked faithfully, courageously, and with the love of God and His people surrounding me. Even if only through a screen, even if only in whispers and prayers, I allowed myself to hope, to trust, to imagine a future where I could speak truth, embrace freedom, and live in light rather than fear. And in that hope, fragile yet undeniable, I felt the first stirrings of readiness. To pray aloud, to confess secretly, to step beyond the shadows, and to follow the whispers wherever they would lead me. I had been standing at the edge of this moment for weeks, months, maybe years, though I had never named it aloud. The whisper, the dreams, the visions, and the hidden verses I had read, they all led me here, trembling at the threshold of something I could not yet fully comprehend. I was alone in my room, heart pounding, palms slick with sweat, every nerve alert, every thought a mix of fear, longing, and desperate hope. I knew what I had to do, though my body trembled and my mind screamed warnings I had memorized since childhood. This was dangerous, forbidden, unthinkable. And yet, the hunger in my soul was unbearable. I dropped to my knees, and fingers curling into the sheets beneath me, and whispered my first prayer to Jesus. It was clumsy, awkward, a voice shaking with fear and disbelief. Jesus, I don't know if you're real, but I need you. I can't live like this anymore. Please show me the truth. Help me. Save me. The words were barely audible, but in that quiet confession, a weight lifted from my chest, a tension I had carried for decades loosened, and tears poured down my face. I had prayed countless times before, memorized prayers, words I had repeated without understanding, without connection. But this was different. This was raw, vulnerable, desperate and real. I felt my heart open in a way it never had before. The room felt impossibly still, yet it seemed charged with presence. I could almost sense a warmth, a gentle light pressing against the darkness that had filled my life for so long. And then, almost imperceptibly, I felt it. Peace. Not the kind that comes from obedience, and not the calm of habit, but a profound, soul-deep peace that touched every part of me. My fear did not vanish, but it was no longer paralyzing. It became a companion, a reminder that the path I had chosen was real, that danger and love often walk side by side, and that courage is measured not by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to act in spite of it. I whispered more words, letting my heart pour itself out, confessing doubts, pain, loneliness, shame, longing, and hope. When I asked for forgiveness for my hidden rebellion, for guidance through the storm at home, for courage to continue seeking truth. Each word seemed to reverberate in the quiet room, echoing in my soul, weaving a connection I had never experienced before. For the first time, I realized that prayer was not a ritual. It was a dialogue, an encounter, a lifeline. I could speak, and I could be heard. I could feel, and I could be understood. The fear of discovery, the weight of family expectations, in the terror of judgment. They all lingered, but they were tempered now by something stronger. The undeniable reality that I had reached out, and I had been met. I stayed on my knees long into the night, my voice trembling, my tears soaking the sheets, my heart overflowing with emotions I could not name. And somewhere in the quiet, in the stillness of that room, I felt the first inklings of transformation, and I began to sense that my journey was no longer just a search for truth. It was a movement of the soul, a birth of courage, a spiritual awakening that could not be denied. I realized that the whisper I had followed, the dreams that had shaken me, the hidden fellowship that had nurtured me, they had all been preparing me for this encounter. And now, in this private, sacred moment, I had stepped into it. I felt a warmth in my chest, a light in my mind, as a clarity in my spirit that had never existed before. I could not see Jesus, not with my eyes, not physically, but I felt him, unmistakably present. And with that presence came assurance, a quiet, unshakable knowledge that I was not alone, that I had been heard, that my soul mattered, that I had found the truth I had been longing for. I whispered one final prayer before the night fully surrendered to dawn. I trust you, Jesus. I give you my heart. I choose you, and even if I lose everything else. And in that moment, trembling and vulnerable, I knew that I had been transformed. Not yet fully free from fear, not yet beyond the storm that awaited me, but changed irreversibly, irrevocably, awakened, and guided by a love I had never known. The first prayer had opened the door. The first step had been taken, and I would never turn back. After my first prayer to Jesus, life began to shift in ways I could not have imagined. At first, the changes were subtle, small flickers that I almost dismissed as coincidence, but slowly they became undeniable. I noticed the way my heart felt lighter, even after a confrontation with my father left me trembling. The heaviness of fear that had always gripped me seemed to loosen, as though someone unseen had placed a hand gently on my chest and whispered, "I am here." One evening, as I sat quietly in my room, my Bible app open on the screen, I read a verse from Psalms. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." The words fell over me like a soft rain, soaking into every wound I carried. I felt tears stream down my cheeks, but they were not just tears of fear, they were relief, a release I had been starving for my entire life. A few days later, I left the market carrying a basket heavier than my strength could manage. I stumbled on the uneven stones of our street, certain I would fall, and certain I would be crushed by my own failure. And then, as if in answer to my silent plea, a neighbor I barely knew reached out and steadied me. There had been no warning, no indication that he would be there, but in that instant, I felt God's presence, protective and tender. Every day, small events like this began to happen. Books I thought lost reappearing in my bag, messages from friends arriving at exactly the right moment, guidance in situations I could not have navigated alone. At first, and I was hesitant to call them miracles, what if I was imagining it? What if fear was tricking me into hope? But the pattern grew too clear to ignore. Even when my father's suspicion increased, even when family gatherings became tense and the stares sharper, I felt a quiet confidence that something greater than their scrutiny was watching over me. One night, I woke from a deep sleep with my heart racing. I had dreamed of the burning darkness again, the vision of Muhammad in flames, but this time, there was a difference. A light pierced through the chaos, soft and golden, and a voice whispered in my heart, gentle yet unmistakable, "I am with you. Follow me." The words echoed in my mind long after I opened my eyes, mingling with the morning sun spilling through my window. It was not fear this time, it was peace. That same week, I hid in my room, Bible open, and read John 14:27. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." I felt as though the verse had been written just for me, a balm for my anxious soul, proof that God saw me, knew me, and was guiding me. Yet the outside world remained dangerous, unpredictable. My absence from prayers was noted, whispered about, questions asked behind closed doors. Every blessing came alongside fear, and I realized the path I was on was not a smooth one. Courage began to grow within me, fragile but persistent. As I learned to recognize the subtle ways God communicated, through answered prayers, through protection, through the whispering comfort that replaced the anxiety that once ruled my heart. The more I trusted, the stronger the signs became. One afternoon, I nearly panicked when I lost my keys for the third time that week. I searched the house frantically, and just when despair threatened to overwhelm me, I felt a nudge in my memory, a quiet prompting to check the kitchen counter. There they were, as exactly where I had forgotten them. I laughed through tears, realizing even such a small moment could carry divine reassurance. Each encounter, each answered prayer, each small miracle stitched a new layer of courage into my spirit. I began to journal these moments, writing down every protective event, every verse that pierced my heart, every whisper of peace I received. I realized that God's hand was not just in the dramatic or the extraordinary, but in every small and intimate act of love and guidance. The realization filled me with hope, a sense that I could endure whatever storm lay ahead. Even the threat of my father's anger, the judgment of my community, the loss of friends and family could not erase the certainty forming in my heart. I understood that following this path required courage, yes, but it also required trust. Trust that every step, however frightening, was held in the care of a God who would not abandon me. As the days passed, as the signs continued, gentle but unyielding, teaching me patience, teaching me courage, teaching me that faith is lived one quiet step at a time. And in that quiet, I felt the first true freedom I had ever known. The freedom of knowing I was not alone, that I was seen, that I was loved, and that every tear, every moment of fear, every anguished prayer had not been wasted. I began to understand that the miracles were not just events, but messages. I was on the right path, and the journey ahead, however fraught, was worth every cost. The tension had been building for days, each glance from my father sharper than the last, each whispered comment from neighbors like a weight pressing down on my chest. That evening, I heard his footsteps approach my room, deliberate and heavy, and I knew there would be no escaping the storm this time. I straightened the bed covers, tried to steady my breath and waited, heart hammering so violently it seemed audible in the quiet room. The door swung open abruptly, and he stood there, towering, eyes dark with anger and confusion. My mother lingered behind him, her hands clasped together, trembling, caught between loyalty to her husband and love for her daughter. My father's voice was low at first, measured, but every word carried the weight of accusation. "Karima, sit with me. We need to talk." I obeyed, though my legs felt like lead, every muscle tense, every thought racing. He did not waste time with small talk. He accused me of abandoning our faith, of walking away from Allah, of disrespecting our family and our ancestors. Each accusation cut like a blade, reopening old wounds and leaving new ones in their place. I tried to explain, my voice shaking, words stumbling over themselves as I spoke of the peace I had found, the prayers I had whispered, the moments of guidance I had felt. But each word seemed to inflame him further, every explanation met with disbelief, fury, and a demand for submission. How can you turn your back on everything we taught you? Everything we suffered for? His face was rigid, mouth set, eyes glinting with a mixture of pain and fury. My mother's lips trembled as she murmured for him to calm down, but he ignored her, and I realized in that instant that the confrontation would not be gentle. My brothers watched from the doorway, their expressions a mixture of fear, confusion, and shame. Like I saw the struggle in their eyes, torn between the familiar loyalty to our father and the shock of seeing their sister declare a faith they had never imagined. I took a deep breath, steadying my trembling hands, and spoke again, this time with more certainty, more conviction. I told him that I had found Jesus, that he had revealed himself to me, that my heart had been transformed, and that I could not deny him without denying the very truth I had glimpsed. The room fell silent and thick with disbelief. My father's jaw tightened, his gaze piercing, and I felt the weight of generations pressing down on me, demanding conformity, obedience, and submission. But beneath the fear, beneath the anger, I felt a strange calm. The whisper I had begun to recognize in quiet moments seemed to swell, filling my chest with courage. I would not recant. He stood, his hand raised as if to strike, but he did not. Instead, he shook his head, his eyes full of sorrow and rage, and told me that I was bringing shame upon our family, that I had gone too far, that I must return to the fold or face consequences alone. My mother stepped forward, tears streaming silently, pleading for us to find common ground, to speak with love. But my father turned away, retreating into the hallway, muttering that our family name had been tarnished. My brothers lingered, one stepping closer to me, whispering that I must be careful, that others would notice, and that gossip could ruin everything. I nodded, though my heart refused to shrink. I realized then that I had reached a point of no return. My choice was clear: obedience to God or obedience to men. Obedience to truth or submission to fear. The weight of what I had discovered, the light I had glimpsed, the peace I had begun to feel, all of it demanded I stand firm. My mother finally closed the door behind my father, and silence fell over the house, heavy and suffocating. I sank onto my bed, trembling, tears flowing freely, and whispered a prayer for strength, for forgiveness, for wisdom. The confrontation had left me raw, wounded, yet strangely empowered. I understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. My family may not understand, my father may not forgive, my brothers may fear for me, but I had seen the truth. I had felt the whisper, the peace, the guiding presence of God, and no threat, no anger, no pressure could erase that. That night I lay awake for hours, listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, the faint sounds of the city beyond, and for the first time, I felt fully awake. Fully aware of the cost, yes, but also fully aware of the grace that had carried me this far. Every tear, every accusation, every trembling moment of fear had led me here. I closed my eyes, whispering again the words that had become my anchor. I am with you. Do not fear. Follow me. The whisper felt stronger now, or infused with promise and presence. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Though danger and rejection lingered on every horizon, I knew I would continue forward. I would stand in the light even if shadows surrounded me. I would follow Christ even if it meant walking alone. And I would do so with the heart wide open, ready for whatever storms may come. The morning after the confrontation, the tension in the neighborhood was almost tangible. As I walked through the narrow streets, whispers followed me like shadows, curious eyes tracking my every step. Mothers clutched their children tighter, men exchanged hurried glances and low murmurs, and even familiar faces avoided me entirely. The mosque, once a place of solace and routine, now felt like a courtroom. I could feel the judgment pressing down, heavy and unrelenting, and I realized with a sinking heart that nothing would remain private for long. Gossip spread like wildfire. A neighbor who had once greeted me warmly crossed the street rather than acknowledge me. Children I had played with as a girl now stared with fear and confusion, their parents whispering warnings I could not hear but felt in every glance. Even at the market, shopkeepers hesitated when I approached, offering polite nods instead of the friendly chatter I had known. I had expected suspicion from my immediate family, but the reach of disapproval surprised me. I felt as though the walls of the world itself were closing in, each stare a reminder that I had stepped outside the safety of conformity. At first, I wanted to hide, to disappear, to shrink into the corners of my home and pretend that nothing had changed. But the whisper, the gentle, loving presence that had guided me through dreams and prayers, stirred in my heart, urging me forward. I could not retreat. I could not erase the truth I had glimpsed. My heart ached as I passed the mosque one evening, hearing the echo of familiar chants and prayers, the voices of my community singing in unison. My absence had been noted, and rumors of my departure from Islam had begun to circulate. Some claimed I was bewitched, others said I had been deceived by foreign influences, yet all shared a tone of fear and condemnation. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, and whispered a prayer for courage. Even as my body trembled, even as my cheeks burned with shame, I refused to bow to fear. I began to see that my struggle was not only spiritual, but deeply social. I had expected inner conflict, perhaps even familial tension, but I had underestimated the power of communal pressure. Friends I had confided in subtly withdrew, avoiding questions, avoiding contact, their loyalty to me outweighed by their fear of association. Invitations stopped, messages went unanswered, and I felt the cold isolation of being truly alone. And yet, amidst the fear and shame, there was a strange clarity. I realized that the cost of truth would always be high. There would be loss, rejection, and discomfort, but the alternative, denying what I had seen and felt, would strip my soul of freedom. One evening, my father's warnings echoed in my mind as I walked past familiar homes. "You are bringing shame, Karima. Think of your family, your name, your future." His words, meant to scare me, only steeled my resolve. Then I had already faced his wrath. The whispers of God within me had proven stronger than fear. In the weeks that followed, incidents of protection and guidance continued to surface, reminding me that I was not abandoned. A sudden turn of events at the marketplace prevented an accident that should have happened. A letter from a distant friend arrived just as I felt despair creeping in. Small, almost imperceptible nudges guided me past danger, reinforcing the presence I had come to trust, and I kept a journal of these moments, documenting each act of providence, each answered prayer, each inexplicable safeguard. It became a lifeline, a tangible reminder that I was not alone, that courage had purpose, that the path I had chosen, though lonely, was divinely watched. Yet the weight of social isolation pressed heavily on me. Invitations to weddings, family gatherings, and community events dwindled to none. People I had loved, people I had grown up with, could now treated me as though I were invisible. Even the neighbors who once smiled in passing offered nothing but curt nods or stiff silence. I felt grief, deep and raw, for the friendships and bonds that were quietly being severed. Nights became the hardest. Lying awake, I wrestled with loneliness, fear, and longing for acceptance. Yet in those moments, I also felt God's comfort more acutely than ever. I whispered prayers not just for protection, but for strength to endure, but for the courage to continue standing in light when darkness pressed from all sides. Over time, I began to recognize that the isolation was forming something new within me, a resilience I had never known, a boldness to act according to truth rather than convenience, a willingness to endure loss for the sake of faith. And in that recognition, a strange peace settled over me, soft and unyielding. The world could reject me, the neighborhood could whisper, my family could grieve, yet the truth I had found in Christ remained unshakable. It was not just knowledge, it was life. And even in the midst of fear, even as rejection and rumor surrounded me, I felt a spark of hope, a quiet courage that told me, "Keep walking, Karima." Every step, every prayer, every moment of trust mattered. This was the path, however difficult, however lonely, however costly, and I would not turn back. The consequences of my faith became undeniable in the days that followed. A close friend, and someone I had grown up with, someone I had shared secrets and laughter with, suddenly stopped answering my messages. At first, I hoped it was coincidence, a busy schedule, a misunderstanding. But the silence stretched on for days, and I realized with a sinking heart that my decision had cost me a bond I had once believed unbreakable. The loss hit harder than any argument, more painful than the harsh words of my father, because it was personal, intimate, and irrevocable. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a weight I could not shake. Memories of childhood filled my mind, times when we had whispered together in the courtyard after prayers, laughing at small mischiefs, confiding in each other about our hopes and fears. Those moments now felt distant, like fragments of another life. Then another mentor, someone I had trusted for guidance and counsel, turned away after learning of my faith in Jesus. I remember the conversation vividly, their eyes filled with sorrow, each voice trembling as they spoke. "Karima, I cannot follow you down this path. It is dangerous. It will ruin you. Please, think of what you are risking." I wanted to argue, to insist that this was truth, that this was life, that this was freedom. But their face mirrored the fear of 1,000 others, the collective dread of a community that could not understand. I was left standing in silence, the words hanging between us like a chasm too wide to cross. The isolation grew heavier, creeping into my everyday. Even familiar streets and familiar faces became reminders of my loneliness. Invitations vanished, greetings became curt, and suspicion lingered in the eyes of those who once smiled warmly at me. Every interaction carried the weight of judgment, the unspoken warning that I had chosen wrongly in the eyes of the world. I cried often in the privacy of my room, tears unrelenting, a mix of grief, frustration, and fear. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if the cost of truth was too high, if the path I had chosen was worth the sacrifices piling up around me. My heart ached for connection, for understanding, for the warmth of relationships that had been stripped away by my decision to follow Christ. Yet in the midst of this despair, the whisper I had grown to trust returned with gentle insistence. It was not loud or demanding, but tender and unwavering. "You are not alone. Do not fear the cost, and I am with you." Those words, soft yet powerful, anchored me when the world threatened to unravel me. I began to see that loss was part of the journey, that every severed tie, every cold glance, every disappointed voice was a test of endurance, a forging of courage, a preparation for the fullness of faith. I remembered the story of Abraham, who had been called to sacrifice what he loved most, yet had trusted God completely. I saw a reflection of that call in my own life, a challenge to hold fast even when it hurt, even when it cost everything I had known. Slowly, a resilience began to take root. I learned to mourn the losses without bitterness, to honor the friendships and mentors that could no longer walk with me, and to place my trust fully in the God who had revealed himself to me in whispers, dreams, and scripture. Each act of endurance strengthened me. Each moment of courage fortified my spirit. I began to understand that following truth was never easy, that it always demanded sacrifice, but that the reward was not worldly approval. It was peace, it was purpose, it was freedom. And even as loneliness pressed against me, even as community judgment weighed heavily, I felt an inner fire grow, a certainty that my faith was worth every cost, every heartbreak, every fear. I would not recant, I would not compromise, I would follow Christ, and in doing so I discovered a new kind of strength, a deep and abiding courage that could not be taken from me. By the time the sun set each evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I would kneel by my bed, trembling, exhausted, yet filled with resolve. I whispered prayers for those I had lost, for those who could not understand, for the strength to continue. And every night, the whisper came again, steady, unshakable. You are mine. Fear not. Stand firm. In those moments, I realized that the cost of truth was great, but the presence of God was greater, and that even in the shadow of loss, I was not abandoned. The world could turn away, the community could judge, the family could grieve, but my soul had found its anchor, my heart had found its home, and my courage had found its voice. I was beginning to understand what it meant to live fully in Christ, even when the cost was everything I had ever known. The mornings became my refuge, quiet and still, a space where fear had less hold and the whispers of God could speak freely. Each day, I felt a subtle shift within me, a transformation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. My heart, once heavy with doubt and guilt, began to swell with something unfamiliar: confidence, resolve, and a courage that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than my own will. It started small. I spoke a word of truth when before I would have nodded silently. I chose honesty in moments where compromise had once felt safe. I walked a little straighter, and even when the judgmental eyes of neighbors or the weight of my father's disapproval pressed against me, the more I acted in alignment with my newfound faith, the more the courage grew, until I could no longer ignore it. One evening, after a long day of whispered rumors and furtive glances, I sat in my room, Bible in hand, and reflected on how far I had come. I had endured family confrontation, social rejection, and personal loss, yet I was still here, still breathing, still listening for the whisper that had guided me from the moment I opened my heart. I thought of the small miracles, the moments of protection, the inexplicable guidance I had experienced. They were no longer just comfort. They were affirmation that God had called me, that my path, however dangerous, was not in vain. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer hide the faith I had found. I would no longer shrink from my convictions, even if it meant facing loss, anger, or isolation. The courage is not born in safety, it is forged in the fire of trial, and I had been tempered in ways I could not have imagined. I began planning small acts of boldness, prayers at home in the open, sharing verses quietly with friends who might listen, seeking connection with others who shared my faith. Each step was deliberate, each act a declaration that I would not be silenced. And yet, the fear was still there, a shadow at the edge of every decision. What if my father's anger escalated? What if rumors spread further, endangering me in ways I could not anticipate? What if the friends and mentors who had turned away returned with condemnation? I acknowledged the fear, but I refused to let it dictate my actions. I reminded myself that fear is a natural companion on the path of faith, but it is not authority over the soul. The more I embraced that truth, the more I could act without hesitation, the more I could speak without trembling. I remembered the Psalms I had memorized, on the verses that had carried me through sleepless nights, the promises of God's presence and protection. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. I whispered it under my breath, over and over, letting the words anchor me. With each repetition, I felt the courage grow stronger, filling the spaces once occupied by doubt and hesitation. One afternoon, a neighbor approached me cautiously, curiosity etched across her face. She asked why I no longer attended the mosque so regularly, and I felt my pulse quicken. I could have smiled politely, offered a vague excuse, and returned to hiding. But instead, I spoke simply and calmly. I am following a different path now, one that brings me peace and truth. Her eyes widened, and I saw the immediate judgment in her expression. Yet I felt no fear. I felt only calm, and a sense of purpose I had never known. Later that week, I began to write in my journal, documenting the steps I was taking, the prayers I whispered, of the moments of courage that punctuated each day. It became a testament to myself, a record of the transformation within, and the reminder that bravery is cultivated moment by moment. I realized that courage was not a single, dramatic act, but a series of choices, small, deliberate, persistent. I was choosing to stand in truth, to honor the whispers of God within me, and to embrace the faith that had transformed my heart. Even in moments of loneliness, even in the face of community disapproval, and I felt a new kind of joy, a freedom I had never known. It was a joy that did not depend on acceptance, on approval, or on comfort. It was a joy born of conviction, of faith, of knowing that I was walking in the light of something eternal and unshakable. And as I lay awake each night, reflecting on the day's steps, I whispered prayers of gratitude for the courage that had risen within me. I prayed for continued strength, for wisdom, for the ability to face whatever trials lay ahead with the same steadfast heart. The whisper was there still, soft and persistent, reminding me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. And I had chosen. I was rising piece by piece, step by step, toward the fullness of the faith that was transforming me. That night, sleep came reluctantly, heavy with the memories of confrontation and loss, but in the darkness, I felt a presence, gentle yet undeniable. And it began as a warmth in my chest, spreading slowly, softening the fear and tension that had clung to me for weeks. My eyelids grew heavy, and I drifted into a dream that felt more like a vision. I found myself standing in a vast, quiet space, neither day nor night, but bathed in a gentle golden light that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The air was warm and comforting, carrying the faint scent of flowers and fresh water. I could hear a soft, melodic voice calling my name, Karima. I turned, and before me stood a figure radiant with love and light, eyes deep and knowing, exuding a peace that made every fear I had ever known seem small and distant. It was Jesus, though I felt I could not fully comprehend him with my human mind. His gaze fell upon me, and suddenly all the burdens of shame, guilt, and fear that had weighed so heavily on my shoulders melted away, leaving only the clarity of truth and the warmth of acceptance. And tears streamed down my face, and I fell to my knees, overwhelmed, yet embraced by a peace I had never known. The voice spoke again, tender, patient, but filled with authority and care. Child, you have endured much. You have faced fear, loss, and doubt, yet you have held fast. Your courage has not gone unnoticed. I am with you, and I will never abandon you. I wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but words failed me. Instead, I simply wept. I'm feeling the release of every tear I had ever held back, every cry of my heart whispered in the quiet of my room, now acknowledged and received. Then the vision shifted. I saw scenes of my life from a distance, moments of fear, moments of hope, moments of questioning, and each scene was surrounded by light, as if every hardship had been placed within the hands of a divine purpose. The fear of my father's anger, the isolation from my friends, and the whispers of my community. They all seemed small in comparison to the love and presence enveloping me now. A gentle wind swirled around me, and I felt lifted, as if the weight of the world had been placed aside. I realized in that moment that redemption was not just for the future, but available here and now. Every step of faith I had taken, Every act of courage, every tear shed in prayer, had been held, honored, and multiplied in ways I could not yet see. And then I saw flashes of people I had loved and lost along the way. The friend who stopped answering, the mentor who turned away, the family who could not yet understand, and I realized they were not abandoned either. God's hand reached into every heart, every life, even those who could not yet comprehend, offering mercy, hope, and transformation in His own perfect timing. I felt an overwhelming urge to stand, to move, to live fully in this truth, knowing that fear no longer had authority over me. Every breath I took was infused with courage, peace, and clarity. The vision lasted only moments, yet it etched itself into my soul as if it had always been part of me. When I awoke, the sunlight had begun to filter softly through my curtains, but I felt the radiance of that vision lingering within me. The whisper remained, now clearer, guiding me forward. Walk in faith, child. The path is yours, and you are never alone. In the days that followed, the memory of the vision bolstered me in ways that words cannot fully capture. Confrontations that once would have left me trembling now stirred determination. The judgment of my community no longer held the same power over my spirit. I began to move through my days with a quiet authority, a confidence that came not from my own strength, but from the presence I had experienced in the vision. I prayed constantly, not out of obligation, but in response to the love and guidance I had received. I shared small acts of kindness, reached out to others quietly, and allowed the light within me to guide my actions without seeking recognition or reward. The vision of redemption had shown me the eternal perspective, that suffering was not meaningless, that courage mattered, and that every moment of faith had value beyond what I could see. And in that knowledge, I felt free. Free from fear, free from guilt, free from the pressure of expectation. And I understood that true freedom is not the absence of trial, but the presence of God in every trial. I knew now that my faith, though costly, was the source of life, peace, and joy that nothing in the world could take away. And for the first time in my life, I felt wholly alive, wholly unafraid, wholly certain that the journey ahead, however difficult, would be walked with Him, and that nothing could separate me from His love. The day came when I could no longer keep my faith hidden, when silence had become a weight heavier than any confrontation I had faced. I remember standing at the threshold of our home, hands trembling slightly, heart pounding as though it would break through my chest, and thinking of all the moments that had brought me to this point, the dreams, the whispers, the visions, the gentle guidance that had never abandoned me. I knew that once I spoke, there would be no going back. My father, already suspicious, paced the living room, his eyes sharp and voice clipped. My mother hovered behind him, anxious, hesitant, fear etched into every line of her face. I took a deep breath, feeling the whisper I had come to trust steady my nerves. "I have found Jesus," I said, my voice clear, though my body shook. The words echoed in the room like a bell, resonating against the walls of our home and against the fears that had once imprisoned me. There was a moment of stunned silence. My father's face twisted in disbelief and anger, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. My mother's lips parted, silent and trembling. The weight of family expectation pressed down, yet I felt lighter than I ever had, as if a great burden had been lifted from my shoulders. My father's voice rose, sharp and accusing. "How can you say such a thing? Have you lost your mind? Do you not understand what you are doing to yourself, to our family?" I met his gaze, feeling no fear, only clarity. "I understand more than I ever did before. And I have seen the truth, felt the peace, and I cannot deny what God has placed in my heart. I follow Christ, and I will not turn back." My words hung in the air, firm and unwavering, carrying the weight of every prayer, every tear, every moment of courage I had ever known. My mother began to cry softly, stepping forward, hands trembling as she reached for mine. "Karima, I do not understand," she whispered. "I fear for you. for what people will say, for what might happen. I held her hands gently, tears in my own eyes. I know it is hard to understand, but this is where I must stand. I am not rejecting you, Mother. I am following the one who has shown me love beyond anything I have ever known. My father's anger escalated, voice booming as he tried to intimidate me, to break the resolve I had worked so hard to cultivate. He shouted about tradition, honor, family, and shame, every word designed to strike fear into my heart. But I was no longer the same child who had cowered in corners, afraid of the judgment of men. The vision, the whispers, the miracles, they had fortified me. I stood, trembling perhaps, but unbroken, and met his fury with calm resolve. I will not live in fear of shame or rejection. My life, my faith, my soul, they belong to God. I choose him, no matter the cost. The room seemed to constrict around us, the tension so thick it was almost physical. Yet in that pressure, I felt a strange peace, an inner calm that no anger could touch. The confrontation continued, accusations and warnings exchanged, but my heart was steady. I had rehearsed no words, memorized no speech, relied on no rhetoric. I spoke from the deepest place of my soul, the place that had been shaped by every prayer, every whisper, every act of courage that had brought me here. My siblings watched silently, some in shock, some in fear, and I realized that my choice was rippling beyond me, it touching hearts and lives in ways I could not yet see. Finally, my father stormed out of the room, muttering threats, leaving my mother and me alone in silence. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was filled with the presence I had come to trust, a reassurance that my declaration had been witnessed and honored by God himself. I sank onto my bed, exhausted, tears streaming freely, and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving, gratitude pouring from every corner of my being. I knew that danger, as opposition and pain might still come, but I also knew that I had taken a stand that could not be undone. I had claimed my faith openly, without compromise, without fear, without hiding. And in that moment, I felt freedom unlike anything I had ever known. I realized that boldness is not the absence of fear, but the presence of trust. It is to act, speak, and live according to truth, even when the world resists. My stand was not just for myself, it was for the whispers I had heeded. It's the prayers I had prayed, the path God had called me to walk. The day faded into evening, and I sat in quiet reflection, aware that this was only the beginning. The boldness I had claimed today would be tested again, in ways I could not yet imagine, but I was ready. Ready to face whatever came, ready to endure whatever cost, ready to live fully in the light of Christ, fully free, fully known, fully His. And in that quiet, I felt a joy deeper than fear, a peace stronger than opposition. I'm in the courage that would not be shaken. The day I had dreaded finally arrived. My father confronted me again, but this time it was not just words, it was a reckoning, a collision of wills that seemed to stretch the very air between us. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in, every breath heavy with anticipation. I could see the anger etched into every line of his face, the disappointment in his eyes, the fear that perhaps his daughter had been lost to him forever. My mother lingered in the doorway, hands clasped tightly, a silent prayer etched into her posture, torn between loyalty to her husband and love for me. My heart raced, yet I felt no retreat. The whisper within, steady and unyielding, reminded me of every step that had led here, the dreams, the visions, the small miracles that had carried me through weeks of isolation and fear. Karima, he began, voice trembling with fury and pain. Look at me. Look at what you are doing. And how can you abandon everything? How can you turn your back on Allah and your family? I met his gaze, and though my voice shook, it carried the weight of conviction. Father, I have not abandoned anything that is true. I have found the truth in Jesus Christ, and my soul cannot deny what I have seen, what I have felt, and what I have been called to follow." His jaw tightened, hands balling into fists, yet he did not strike. Instead, his words came faster, sharper, each one designed to cut, to intimidate, to bend me into submission. "Do you not understand what shame you bring? The disgrace? The gossip? The dishonor to our name? You are lost. You have no idea what path you walk." I felt the pressure, the centuries of tradition, the weight of family honor, the whispers of neighbors, all pressing against me like a tidal wave. My knees trembled, yet I did not bend. I had rehearsed no words, prepared no defense, for the defense was not mine to give. My courage came from another, from the presence that had never left me, from the whisper that had guided me from the first night I dared to pray alone. "Father," I said, softer now but still firm, "I understand the cost. I understand the shame. I know the world may turn against me, and that my choices may bring pain to this family. But I will not deny the one who has saved me, the one who has given me life, peace, and hope. I cannot return to fear. I cannot return to silence. I must follow Christ." He froze, met the words sinking in, his anger colliding with disbelief. I saw his chest heave as if he were struggling to breathe, struggling to process that his daughter had chosen a path he could not understand. My mother's lips trembled as she whispered, "Karima." But I placed my hand over hers, offering comfort even as I faced the storm. I could feel the tension around us, thick and suffocating, the culmination of weeks of whispers, rumors, confrontations, and prayers. And the air seemed to vibrate with the weight of this moment, as if time itself had paused, waiting for the outcome of my declaration. I closed my eyes briefly, whispered a prayer for strength, and opened them to meet my father's gaze once more. "I will not turn back," I said, my voice steadier than I had imagined. "I will not deny what God has shown me. You may not understand and the world may judge, but my soul belongs to Him and no one can take that from me." For a moment, he said nothing. I just stared, the fury giving way to a mixture of grief, disbelief, and helplessness. Then he turned sharply and left the room, slamming the door with a force that rattled the walls. Silence fell, heavy and absolute, yet it was different now. Less oppressive, more charged with the knowledge that a decisive moment had occurred. I sank to the floor, trembling, tears streaming, yet a profound sense of relief filled me. The climax had come. I had faced the confrontation I had feared for weeks, and had stood in truth and had not wavered. I realized that fear had lost its power the moment I chose obedience to God over obedience to men. The room was empty now, except for my mother and me, and even her presence felt infused with unspoken support, love, and a fragile hope that perhaps, in time, understanding could come. I whispered a prayer of thanksgiving, gratitude flowing in waves for the courage that had risen within me, for the peace that had settled over my spirit, and for the guidance that had never left me even in moments of doubt. I knew the journey ahead would not be easy. Opposition, rejection, and danger could still come, but the fear that had once held me captive had been broken. In that instant, I understood the power of standing firm in truth, the freedom of living openly in the light of Christ, and the unshakable peace that comes from surrendering fully to the one who had called me. The climax had passed, but the transformation was complete. But I was no longer a child hiding in shadows. I was a woman standing boldly in faith, fearless, free, and fully alive in the presence of God. The morning after the confrontation, a calm settled over me that I had never experienced before. The fear that had dominated my every thought for weeks was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty that I had taken my stand and that my soul was aligned with truth. I walked through my home with a sense of lightness. I'm noticing the small details I had overlooked for so long. The sunlight filtering through the curtains, the hum of life outside the window, the soft rhythm of my own heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, I felt unburdened, untethered from the weight of expectation and judgment. Each breath I took felt like freedom, each step a declaration that I was no longer held captive by fear or shame. My mother, cautiously approaching, placed her hand in mine. Her eyes glistened with tears, reflecting a mixture of sorrow, fear, and perhaps a dawning understanding. "Karima," she whispered, "I still don't understand, but I see peace in your eyes that I've never seen before." I held her hands, feeling the warmth and fragility of her love, and replied softly, "Mother, it is real. This is life, and this is freedom. I am not afraid anymore, and I can live fully, with joy, because of him." Outside, the world remained unchanged, the gossip, the suspicion, the disapproval, but it no longer held sway over me. I walked through the neighborhood and felt the invisible chains of judgment fall away. Every glance that had once felt like accusation now seemed inconsequential. I was free not because the world had accepted me, but because God had claimed me, and no power on earth could undo that. In the days that followed, I experienced a sense of healing that went deeper than the physical or social. Wounds of the heart, long buried under fear and shame, began to mend. The loneliness I had endured was transformed into a profound communion with God, a quiet joy that filled the spaces once occupied by dread. I reached out to a few trusted friends, sharing my experiences cautiously, and discovered that courage can inspire courage. Now, even those who had been hesitant began to see the authenticity in my faith, and small connections started to form, reminding me that community could exist in Christ even when the world had turned away. I began to attend online fellowship gatherings, participate in virtual Bible studies, and pray with believers who encouraged and strengthened me. And each interaction reinforced the reality that freedom in Christ is not only personal, but relational. He builds his family across distances and differences beyond the barriers of culture and tradition. The whisper I had relied on for weeks now felt like a steady song within my heart, guiding me in decisions, offering wisdom in moments of uncertainty, and sustaining me through the social isolation I still faced. Every prayer, every meditation, every act of courage became a testament to the transformative power of faith. I reflected on the journey, on the dreams that had shaken me awake, on the vision of Muhammad in hell that had terrified me into seeking truth, on the countless small miracles that had sustained me, and I realized that every moment, no matter how painful, had been part of a divine plan. I felt a gratitude that overflowed, a peace that settled like a river through my veins, a joy that radiated from my soul. In the world could still judge, still whisper, still attempt to impose fear, but I had discovered a freedom that was unshakable, rooted not in circumstance but in the presence of God. And in that freedom, I found purpose. I began to write, to pray, to share my story cautiously but boldly, knowing that the testimony of faith could be a light for others lost in fear and doubt. I was free, not because the path was easy, but because I had embraced truth, faced fear, endured loss, and discovered the immeasurable love of Jesus Christ. Each day became a celebration of life, a reaffirmation of courage, and a deepening of trust. I walked through my world with a heart unburdened, a soul unafraid, and a spirit fully alive, knowing that freedom in Christ is not merely a moment, but a lifelong journey, ever growing, ever strengthening, ever filled with the light of His presence. And for the first time in my life, I knew I could face anything, for He had already faced it with me. And after embracing Christ openly, I realized that while I had gained freedom, I still longed for connection. A family not bound by blood or tradition, but by shared faith, love, and understanding. The loneliness that had haunted me during weeks of fear and isolation had shown me the value of genuine fellowship, and now I sought it with intention. I began attending online prayer groups, connecting with other believers who had walked similar paths. Their stories resonated deeply, and I saw pieces of myself reflected in their courage, their struggles, their triumphs. Through these connections, I began to experience a spiritual family, people who understood the cost of faith and the beauty of redemption. They prayed with me, encouraged me, and reminded me that I was never truly alone. One evening, during a virtual fellowship session, I shared my journey for the first time. My voice trembled as I recounted the fears, the losses, and the visions that had guided me. And tears streamed down my face as I described seeing Muhammad in hell, the dreams that had unsettled me, and the gentle whispers that had led me to Christ. As I spoke, I felt a profound release, a healing that words alone could not convey. People responded with empathy, affirmation, and love. Their acceptance, unconditional and without judgment, filled spaces in my heart that had been empty for years. I realized then that family is not always defined by lineage. It is defined by love, faith, and shared purpose. In the weeks that followed, I began to build deeper relationships within this spiritual family. Mentors guided me through scripture, friends prayed with me daily, and I learned to minister in small ways to others seeking freedom and understanding. Each act of fellowship strengthened my resolve. Each prayer session deepened my faith. Each shared testimony reminded me that I belonged. Outside this new family, challenges remained. My father's anger had not dissipated entirely. My siblings were hesitant, and the community still whispered. But within this spiritual family, I had a foundation stronger than fear. I could face the outside world with courage, knowing that I had a sanctuary in Christ and a network of believers who supported and loved me unconditionally. One Sunday, I participated in my first baptism service online, a symbolic act of complete surrender to Christ. As I repeated the words aloud, acknowledging Him as my Savior, and I felt a profound sense of belonging. It was not merely a ritual, it was a declaration, a testimony, a covenant that bound me to this new family, a family of faith that transcended culture, geography, and tradition. The days that followed were filled with intentional living, prayer, and ministry in the ways I could. I shared encouragement with other ex-Muslims seeking Christ, offered support to new converts, and nurtured the bonds of this spiritual family. In every conversation, in every act of love, I felt the echo of God's presence, reminding me that I had been created for connection, for community, for shared purpose. I began to see the profound beauty of this new family, the joy of mutual understanding, the comfort of shared faith, the courage that comes from walking together through trials. I no longer measured my worth by the approval of those who rejected me. Instead, I measured it by the depth of my relationship with God and the love I shared with others. And in that love, I found healing for every wound, hope for every fear, and joy that could not be taken. I realized that I had not lost a family. I had gained one infinitely greater, bound not by tradition but by faith, not by expectation but by grace. The whisper I had relied on for months now felt like a chorus, strengthened by the prayers and voices of this spiritual family. Every day, I felt more courage, more peace, more purpose. I had discovered that family is not always given, that sometimes it is chosen, nurtured, and built through shared faith and love. I walked each day knowing that I was surrounded by a network of believers, my spiritual siblings and mentors, a community that reminded me I was cherished, valued, and never alone. In this new family, I thrived, not in worldly success, not in societal approval, but in love, faith, and shared purpose. And each night, as I knelt to pray, I whispered gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, the losses, the trials, and the visions, the courage, the miracles, and finally, the embrace of a spiritual family that reflected the heart of God Himself. Weeks after fully embracing Christ and finding my spiritual family, I was still haunted by the vision I had once received, the one where I saw Muhammad in hell. It had been terrifying, yes, but now it pressed upon me with a new urgency, a message I could no longer ignore. And I could not silence the whisper that said God wanted me to understand and share the deeper truth about Ramadan. That evening, I sat alone in my room, Bible open, heart pounding, recalling every detail, the fire, the confusion, the words that had seemed to pierce my very soul. I remembered the stark contrast between fear and mercy, the undeniable sense that God was calling me to clarity. And then, slowly, I began to understand. Ramadan, in the way I had known it, had become a ritual of obligation, of endurance, of fear, fasting and prayer not always connected to the heart, but often to social approval, spiritual performance, and the weight of tradition. The vision had shown me that outward obedience, without the transformation of the soul, is empty, even dangerous. True devotion, God whispered to me through the memory of that dream, is not measured by ritual alone, but by the heart's alignment with truth, mercy, and love. And tears blurred my eyes as I realized the depth of what I had seen. A warning, not to condemn, but to awaken. Ramadan, though sacred to many, could not replace the life-changing power of God's love in Christ. The rituals, the fasts, the prayers, they could never cleanse the heart or bring true freedom apart from Him. I felt compelled to share this revelation, to speak not with arrogance but with gentleness and urgency. My soul ached for those still bound by fear and tradition, and for the countless people performing rituals that left them empty, afraid, or lost. I began to pray fervently for the courage to speak the truth with love, for wisdom in communicating the message without provoking unnecessary anger, yet clearly enough that hearts might awaken. As I prayed, a gentle clarity came. I was called to testify, to witness, to illuminate the path of life through Christ for those trapped in cycles of fear and ritual without understanding. The vision of Muhammad in hell was not meant to incite judgment. It was a mirror for my own heart, a divine wake-up call for all who would hear. My tears fell freely as I whispered the message aloud. True life comes not from rituals performed in fear, but from love received and shared. True fasting is of the heart, of surrender, of seeking the one who gives life, not merely surviving days without food. True devotion is found in Christ, in mercy, in transformation that begins within and radiates outward. I felt the weight of responsibility, yet also the peace of obedience. I knew that the path I walked would be challenging. Many would reject, accuse, or ridicule, but the truth demanded boldness. I wrote in my journal, recording every detail of the vision, every whisper, every insight God placed in my heart. I knew that someday someone would read these words and understand that the cost of faith is high, yet the reward is immeasurable. And I recalled the struggles, the losses, the loneliness, and I realized that none of it compared to the freedom I had found, nor to the urgency of sharing this message with others still lost in ritual without transformation. The sun began to rise, casting a soft glow across my room, and I felt a peace unlike anything I had known before. I understood now that my journey, the fear, the visions, the courage, the confrontations, had all led to this purpose: to bear witness, to testify, thus to call hearts toward life, truth, and freedom in Christ. Ramadan, as I had practiced it, could not save, could not deliver, could not heal the soul. But Jesus could. And as I whispered a final prayer of gratitude and dedication, I resolved that I would live my life boldly, sharing this truth with compassion, courage, and unwavering faith. I would no longer hide, I would no longer fear. My message was clear, my mission defined, and my heart fully surrendered to the one who had redeemed me from fear, darkness, and death. The vision that had once terrified me now guided me, illuminated my path, and strengthened my voice for all who would listen. I would speak, I would testify, and I would live in the freedom of Christ, trusting that God's hand would guide every step and that His truth would reach hearts willing to hear. I never imagined that my story would reach beyond the quiet walls of my room, out beyond the whispers of my heart, beyond the fear that had once held me captive. Yet here I was, recording my testimony for others to hear, to see, to feel, to awaken them as I had been awakened. Sitting in front of the camera, Bible in hand, I felt the same trembling I had felt the first time I prayed openly to Jesus. But it was different now. This was not fear, it was the weight of responsibility, the gravity of truth, the urgency to speak with honesty and compassion. "Hello," I began, and voice wavering at first, then gaining strength. "My name is Karima. I was raised in a devout Muslim family, but I have found Jesus Christ, and He has changed my life completely." As I spoke, memories came rushing. My childhood, Ramadan nights, Quran recitations, the fear of judgment, the shame of doubt. Every loss, every tear, every moment of courage came alive in my words, and I felt the Holy Spirit guiding each sentence, each pause, each inflection. I shared the dreams, the vision of Muhammad in hell, the whispers that led me to Christ, the confrontations with my family, the loneliness, and the miraculous peace that followed. I could see the story unfolding on the screen, the camera capturing not just my words, but the emotion, the truth, the authenticity that no script could replicate. I know many of you are struggling with fear, with doubt, with the pressure of tradition and expectation. I said, tears brimming in my eyes. I know what it feels like to be isolated, to feel as though the world is against you. But I want you to know that freedom, peace, and joy are real. They are found in Jesus Christ, and He is waiting for you, no matter where you are, no matter how lost you feel. I told them about the spiritual family I had found, the mentors, the prayer partners, the online fellowship that reminded me I was never truly alone. And I wanted them to see that leaving behind fear and ritual was not just about abandoning something, it was about stepping into something infinitely greater, a life full of purpose, love, and truth. Then I paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of the call to action resting gently in my heart. If this testimony touches you in any way, please consider sharing it, not to boast, not to pressure, but to give hope to someone who may be searching, someone who may be lost, and someone who may need to hear that they are not alone and that God's love is real. Subscribe, like, comment, share. Let others see that there is a way to freedom, to peace, to life. I spoke with a trembling honesty that no script could manufacture. Every word was a prayer, every sentence an act of courage, every message a lifeline to someone I might never meet. As I finished, I felt a deep release, a sense of completion, not of my journey. No, it would continue, but of this chapter, this sharing, this act of obedience. My heart was full, my spirit light, and my soul at peace. The screen went dark, yet the presence of God remained, settling over me as if to whisper, "Well done, child. Your testimony will reach hearts beyond your imagining." I leaned back, tears of gratitude streaming down, reflecting on how far I had come. From silence and fear to courage and declaration, from isolation and doubt to freedom and community. Every vision, every whisper, every confrontation had led to this moment. A story shared, a light held up, a hand extended to those still in darkness. I prayed silently, asking God to use my testimony to awaken hearts, to comfort the broken, to embolden the fearful. I prayed for protection over those who would watch, for courage for those who would be inspired, for wisdom for those who might seek to guide others. And I realized then that sharing my story was not just about testimony. It was about mission, about purpose, and about fulfilling the call to witness the transformative power of Christ in a world full of fear, doubt, and ritual without life. I whispered again, softly but with conviction, "Lord, use this testimony for your glory. Let it reach the hearts that need you most. Let it bring hope, courage, and faith." In that quiet moment, I felt complete peace, a deep knowing that obedience to truth, even when costly, is always rewarded. My story was now more than mine. It was a beacon, a call, yes, a gift to anyone willing to listen, to believe, to take the step of courage that leads to freedom in Christ. And I knew with unshakable certainty that this was only the beginning. Now, sitting quietly in my room, Bible open before me, I take a deep breath and reflect on the journey that has brought me here. The path was not easy. Fear, doubt, betrayal, loneliness, and loss marked every step. But each trial, each tear, each moment of courage has shaped me into the woman I am today. I remember the nights spent trembling over questions I dared not speak aloud, the whispers in the dark that guided me toward truth, the vision of Muhammad in hell that shook me to my core, and the dreams that beckoned me toward Jesus. I remember the confrontations with my family, the social rejection, the whispers of the community, the isolation that at times felt unbearable. And yet through it all, a light never left me, a presence that whispered gently, persistently, unwaveringly, "Follow me, and you will find life." I feel that presence now as I kneel in prayer, hands clasped, eyes closed, heart open. Lord Jesus, I whisper, voice trembling, thank you for your patience, your mercy, your love. Thank you for guiding me through darkness, for protecting me when I was afraid, and for giving me courage when I felt weak. My mind drifts through every moment of this journey, the fear that once held me captive, the visions that challenged my understanding, the whispers that drew me forward, to the confrontations that tested my resolve. I pray for healing, for all the wounds inflicted by fear and judgment, for the loss of friends and mentors, and for the grief that comes from rejection. Each prayer feels like a release, each tear a cleansing, each heartbeat a reminder that I am alive in Him. I reflect on the freedom I now experience, the peace that flows through my soul, the joy that cannot be taken. It is not merely the absence of fear, but the presence of truth and love that fills every corner of my being. I pray for those who have not yet found this peace, those still trapped by fear, ritual, or obligation. I pray that God's hand would reach into their hearts, that whispers of truth would stir them toward life, that visions of love would awaken them from spiritual slumber. I think of Ramadan, of the lessons I have learned, of the vision that revealed the importance of seeking God's heart rather than merely performing rituals. I pray that all who practice faithfully may seek transformation of the soul and that hearts may be open to the fullness of God's love in Christ. I whisper prayers for my family, for my mother, for my siblings, and even for my father. Though our paths diverge, I ask God to soften hearts, heal wounds, and grant understanding beyond my comprehension. I pray that love, patience, and mercy will prevail where fear and tradition once dominated. My thoughts drift to the community of believers I now call family. I pray for them, for guidance, protection, and blessing, grateful that God has placed us together to encourage, strengthen, and support one another in faith. I reflect on courage, the courage that arose not from my own strength, but from His presence within me. I am reminded that faith is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in truth despite fear. I whisper gratitude for the small miracles, the answered prayers, when the gentle nudges, the protection I have experienced, and the peace that surpasses understanding. I lift my hands now, imagining them reaching out, not just in prayer, but in blessing, in sharing, in guiding others toward the same freedom I have found. I speak aloud, softly but with conviction. Lord, let my life be a testimony, a reflection of your love, truth, and grace. Let my journey encourage, strengthen, and awaken others who are lost in fear or doubt. May every word I speak, and every action I take, every breath I draw glorify you and bring hope to those in need. I feel a deep, unwavering peace settle over me, the kind that cannot be shaken by circumstance, opinion, or threat. It is the peace that comes from obedience, from truth, from living fully in Christ. And as I close my eyes, I allow the reflection to fade into a prayerful silence, letting the presence of God fill every corner of my heart and mind. In this quiet, I am reminded that the journey continues, as that faith must be nurtured daily, that courage must be renewed constantly, but that I am never alone. I am held, guided, and loved beyond measure. And in that truth I rest, fully surrendered, fully alive, fully at peace.